Evening. So, hello. I am hoping I'm not going to make disgusting noises in everybody's ears tonight. The worst part about having a hacking fit on camera is knowing how many of you are listening with earphones because they like the kind of the feel of my voice, and so I'm sorry for anybody who made me feel who I might have made feel grim by hacking in their ears. It is alive. Hello, Avi. It is alive. I am alive. It's I ain't dead yet. I will be supping my special tea as usual. It's quite good, nice, isn't it? Oh. So I'm going to talk a little bit about musical theory before we get started, because oh god, I can't even remember. I think I might have even read it. I think it was one of those pet peeve lines or something, things on Reddit, but it was, or it might have been on TikTok. But there was a person who was talking about, must have been on TikTok or Instagram because I can see their face and stuff. But they were talking about their pet peeve in romance is when there's reference to talking about sliding several octaves. Which, for those of us with a multi-octave voice, this was quite interesting. So, most people's voice sits inside that standard 12-note octave. When you go up an octave, hello, Snowy. I'm actually not reading porn yet, so you're pretty safe. I'm just talking about musical theory. Welcome. Hi. I will be reading some squirrel porn in a bit, just so you know. So yeah. It's Our Nuts. It's one of Dampier's stories. It's a were squirrel one. It's lovely. I did try to read it the last session, and it didn't go well. But Snowy is someone that I know. So, I have referred to you on several occasions if you wish to listen to a mellifluous English voice, to go listen to the Grumpy Gamer. I know Snowy from Grumpy Gamer. It did not go well last week. I was not well. Coughed my lungs up. It was disgusting. Anyway, the octave. 12 notes. Well, when you go up an octave, you are doubling your vibration. So then if you go up again, you're doubling again. So sliding an octave is actually, it's a pretty big deal. From up here to down here, about. I normally have slightly better control. Snowy's absolutely lovely. Over the moon to see you here, Snowy, but remember, this is the place for the weird stuff. But they will also back me up that if you want to listen to mellifluous English tones, Grumpy Gamer's where it's at. Big Grumpy Gamer specifically. I will put a link out. Yeah, so when somebody says his voice dropped an octave, to say that somebody's aroused, so he'll be say that he has a reasonably standard masculine tenor voice, so we're about here, and he's dropping down to a baritone. Sliding down an octave, that's not too bad. But if he drops 2 octaves, then he's a bass. And we're down here. And subharmonics are below that. So if someone says, in surprise, her voice rose several octaves, you can see why, from somebody who was, the person who was complaining about it as a musician, was like, what? Because it pops their suspension of reality. Thank you, Avi. I do. I have my standard range is 4 octaves, which is a hell of a thing. But yeah, if somebody's voice has gone up several octaves, dolphins can hear them, but nobody else can hear them. That's a banshee. Run away. Actually, Dampier has a story about that too. There's not much Dampier doesn't have a story about, frankly. But yeah, Snowy, absolutely. If somebody's voice has gone up several octaves, run away! If you can, because your eardrums are probably just burst. So again, my standard tenor-ish midpoint. And I can convincingly... no, I can't get much higher than that at the minute. So that's 2. Just hurt myself then. But yeah, normally I can, as you know, because you've heard me do like child voices and stuff. Genuinely, my eyes are watering. That stung. The child voices I do, that's 2 octaves. And I can go up to kind of top end of a mezzo soprano, not comfortably, not in any way anybody would want to listen to. But I often do like the little baby voices and the child voices, and they're up here. That's a long way away from my standard natural tenor. Oh, that lovely low bass everybody likes so much. So that's the best I can do today. I have honey tea. I have honey tea. Because I was looking forward to doing this, but I wasn't expecting it to hurt that much. But the vast majority of my audience, Snowy, are writers. So they are incredibly talented writers. So I'm hoping that you're going to really enjoy some of the stories that we read together this evening, because we've got some lovely bits and pieces coming up. I've apparently got all of Gigi's today. Proper case of the sorry about that. So is everybody feeling excited for our monster fucking session? We are opening with Our Nuts by Dampier Drinks Espresso. I could go for an espresso right now. Maybe an affogato. Proper, like, rich, bitter espresso over ice cream. That'd be good. I mean, I shouldn't have that because I'm very lactose intolerant, but so tasty. So our additional tags for this, obviously this is a Raylo story. Alternate universe, modern setting, alternate universe shapeshifters, were creatures, were squirrel, mildly dubious consent, non-consensual touching, others see story notes, past neglect, penis and vagina sex, mating rituals, imprinting, nuts and nut puns, spanking, tickling, squirrel men, crack, fluff and crack, the tags are heavier than the story. Ooh. You could definitely adapt your Webend story to Raylo-ish. It would be... I do love that story. Snowy, heck yes, you are a creative person and looks at monster, can keep away from a monster. Is it you because that's your monster? Or you're not sharing? Or we can relate to that. Okay, hopefully this is quite a fluffy one. As it says, the tags are heavier than the story, so... Where Squirrel Ben Solo loses control and shifts in the break room at work after giving co-worker Ray his best nut. Lucky for him, she gets him out of the building before anyone else sees. Very luckily. It was his own fault, really. Result of a thoughtless action, instinctive. The winter holidays were approaching. Someone had left a bowl of oranges, apples and nuts in the break room. The fruit had gone quickly, but the nuts were all in the shell and apparently no one wanted to work for their reward. Oh well, more for him. He hated Casual Friday, but his mother insisted he participate for morale, so he made sure to pull on his most faded jeans, ragged at the hem, and a hoodie that had probably once been black but had long since become a sad, faded bluish grey. It had pockets, though, and stretch, and it could carry any more than any of his jackets, although the inside pocket of most of his blazers was the perfect place to stash peanut brittle. Pockets already bulging with the choicest walnuts and pecans. Ben hovered over the bowl and peered in, wondering if he would suddenly like hazelnuts even though he never had before. A hand darted into view, strong fingers with short, ragged, did she bite them? Nails, claiming a walnut. You don't want that one. He shouldn't have said anything. Why? He glanced over, suddenly trapped in the gaze for a moment that was a particular shade of autumn oak leaves, just before they burst into glorious warmth of flaming colour. Nesting season, mate, keep warm, safe food. His fingers closed around the largest of the nuts in his right hoodie pocket. Gift. You all right there, Solo? He only realised what he was doing when her eyes dropped to his hand, the prize of his collection resting there in his palm. Her pretty face wrinkled in confusion. Oh, the nut, it's gone bad. You can have this one, though. How can you tell? His mouth worked more quickly than his mind, and he stuttered through claims of a sensitive nose, shell colour variations, and the depths of the grooves, all true, but not exactly human. Ben cringed as she studied him for a moment, then took the proffered nut and grabbed the metal cracker from the table. She plucked the meat from the shell and popped it into her mouth with the sound of appreciation. The tingling started then, as the base of his spine, down through his coccyx. Oh no, not now, not here. Ben, are you okay? What's wrong? He backed away, unable to answer. Oh my God, you're not allergic, are you? No, wait, why would you have... Ben? He could feel it. Any moment his tail was going to break free, all fluffy and grey, and absolutely not something he could explain away. He pressed his back to the wall and slid down. What's wrong with your ears? Are you getting shorter? His hands shot up, only they weren't hands any longer. He stared up at Ray in horror, trapped in the pile of clothes that were far too large, the nuts he'd collected rolling out of the pockets of his jeans and sweater. Her mouth hung open as she stared, but she didn't scream. At least not yet. A distressed chittering escaped him as footsteps approached. A moment later, Ray glanced over her shoulder and looked back at him, hands out with her palms facing him as she took a step forward. I have no idea if you can understand me, but I need to get you out of here before anyone else comes in, yeah? He nodded. He hoped it was what it looked like to her anyway, and struggled out of his clothes, giving a little hop to get out of his loud left shoe. He grabbed the nearest pecan and tucked it in his cheek. Oh, I suppose you wanted those, eh? Ray knelt before him, scooping up the nuts and tucking them into the hoodie pockets. She slipped it on and zipped it up to just under her breasts, before reaching out and gathering him into her arms. She tucked him into the hoodie, scooped the rest of his clothes just as she heard the first footsteps cross from the carpeted hallway to the break room tile. Whatever happens, stay out of sight, she whispered as she pulled the zipper the rest of the way up with her right hand. Her left arm stayed folded across her middle, keeping him from falling. Ray? Rose. Because of course it would be Rose. At least it wasn't Raby baby. Fucking Dameron. Hi guys. What you got there? Are those someone's pants? Holy shit, that's Slowlow's hoodie. Shh! Ray hissed at Poe Dameron, a co-worker and all-round thorn in Ben's side. Are you fucking Solo? Poe demanded, incredulous. No! Ben winced at her tone and volume and unconsciously burrowed against her warmth, head tucked between her breasts. I mean, no, of course not. Why do you have his pants? Poe sounded suspicious and Ben trembled. Surely any moment he would be found out. A prank, Jim. He went to the gym and I stole his clothes because, he's an ass. He couldn't argue with that, but it hurt her here. Also, she was a terrible liar. What are you hiding? Rose asked. You're wearing his hoodie and there's something in there. Damn it, Ray, not again. Oddly enough, Ray relaxed. Okay, yes, again, I found another stray cat and everything was fine and I was going to take him home tonight, but Solo caught me with the cat and that's why I stole his clothes. Okay, I have to go before it comes back. From the gym? Shit, Rose clearly wasn't playing it. Yes, the gym. There was some shuffling and someone left the room. Damn it had to be because of the clack of heels on the tile floor, so it was Rose coming closer. Ray, sweetie, are you okay? Ray's hand rested on him, on the hoodie over him, and he shivered as she began to absently massage his back. Oh, that was nice. He squirmed a bit, pushing back against her hand when it stilled, and he felt her chuckle as she started petting him again. Fine, Rosie. Really? Because this little obsession you have with Solo is getting out of hand. You need to either just ask him out or move on. The childish pranks are going to get you fired if you get caught. Ben's ears twitched and he tilted his head. Ask him out, but Ray hated it. Oh. Well then. Well, that was... If he could have smiled in squirrel form, the grin curving his lips would have been an evil one. Ray made a choking sound as he wiggled, settling in against her breasts and nuzzling her right nipple through her shirt. Ray stuttered and stumbled through excuses before practically running back to her desk and grabbing her bag. She left the office and went down the back stairs, muttering the entire time, "Stop!" She hissed down at her chest as he did it again on the left side. "Ben Solo, I swear if you don't stop, I will personally crack every one of your nuts and throw them away!" That was uncalled for. He stopped moving and retrieved the pecan from his cheek, teeth and little claws working on the shell. He was a stress eater, especially in the fall, and it was the second best of the bunch. He had given Ray his best nut in the break room. She walked a few blocks, moving quickly and using both hands to keep him secure. He heard the rattle of keys and screech of hinges badly in need of oil, or whatever it was that made doors not make that sound. Ray carried him up 3 flights of stairs, breathing heavily by the time she opened another door. This one far quieter, but also rather flimsy sounding. In another minute or so, he blinked at the sudden brightness as she unzipped his hoodie and pulled it off. He looked around, realising he was supported by a high counter and a tiny but bright kitchen. Can you let go now?" All right. He worked his paws carefully, not wanting to scratch her as he untangled himself from her shirt. Tiny bits of pecan shell raining on the surface of the counter. He watched, curious, as Ray moved around the kitchen, pulling a plastic bowl from a high cabinet and began emptying the various pockets of his clothing, depositing his nuts in the container. He scurried over to where she stood by the stove, one paw on her forearm as he peeked into the bowl, then looked back up at her. He made what was probably no more than a squeaking sound to her, but it was the closest squirrel sound to "thank you" he could manage. She paused and studied him a moment, a cat-sized grey squirrel with a fluffy tail longer than his entire body. "You're not so bad like this," she said, plucking a nut from the bowl and offering it out. He took it, tapping at the shell, deciding it would do. She kept talking as he cracked the shell, working to get the nut out in as big a piece as possible. Only a tiny bit crumbled off. He shoved the entire thing in his mouth, and her laughter made him pause. He looked up at her with the end of a pecan poking out. "Fine. You're adorable like this." A sad look crossed her face and she shook her head. "I don't know why. You remind me of, well, a squirrel when I was a kid. I was hungry. My guardian had taken away dinner as punishment for... I don't even remember. He locked me out of the house. I was in the backyard crying, and the squirrel... he brought me snacks." Ben bit down on the nut, pulling half back out of his mouth and chewing slowly. Could it be possible? He barely remembered his first few changes, but had dreamed of her for years. About a little girl, and she had always felt more like a memory. Plutt was his name, Unkar Plutt. His excited squeaking and chittering interrupted her, and he dropped the nut, dashing back and forth on the counter before launching himself at her. "Oof! Oh, careful there," Ray muttered, hands folding over him. "Listen, I don't know if you can control it or not, but you can clearly understand me, and I feel a bit of a disadvantage, so maybe we should wait and chat a bit when you're Ben-shaped again, eh?" He nodded excitedly, paws curled around the collar of her shirt. His tail flicked and swished, brushed her arm. She giggled. "That tickles." He wanted to make her do that again, so when she sat down on the couch, he scrambled behind her, settling in and waiting for his moment. Once she relaxed, he moved very carefully, brushing his furry tail along her neck. She yelped and leaned forward. He probably shouldn't have noticed or even looked, but her nipples were hard, jutting out from under her thin t-shirt. He did it again, and she shivered. She didn't tell him to stop, just watched as he climbed back down into her lap. He watched her face and moved slowly, paws reaching out for one breast. She gasped when he made contact. He saw it, the conflict behind her eyes, and released her, pulling his paws back. She bit her lip, studying him, then seemed to have come to a decision of some sort. She leaned forward the slightest bit and pulled her top off, tossing it to the floor, leaving her in a soft bralette that only accentuated her condition. Ben tilted his head to one side and she nodded. He put his paws on her again and she closed her eyes and sighed, leaning her head against the back of the couch. He didn't push his luck, well aware she was still tense, probably even hesitant to even do this much. Then she sighed and shifted into a more reclined position. He stayed perched on her jean-clad thighs as she moved, and she blushed when she looked at him again. Can you, the tickling with your tail?" she mumbled, the flush crawling over her shoulders and breasts as well as her neck and face. She gestured to her stomach, and he moved, settling himself on her breasts again and staring at her, watching her face as he flicked his tail to brush over her skin. Her flesh erupted in goosebumps and she gasped. He did it again and she squirmed. He could smell her growing arousal and it made him bold. He moved back to her thighs and tapped on the bottom of her jeans. She looked at him, nervous and hesitant. We can play a bit, I suppose, but I'm not fucking a squirrel," she said. He tapped the button again, and then hopped to the floor, crossing to the only other doorway, which he assumed led to her bedroom. His assumption proved correct. Ray stripped off her jeans and lay down on her bed. He climbed on the sheets. Made me giggle, Abby. Ray stripped off her jeans and lay down on her bed. He climbed the sheets and blanket hanging off the side and settled beside her, tapping her hip and giving her a little push. Oh, turn over, she squeaked, and brought his paws together. Ray laughed and turned over, treating him to his first real view of her glorious backside, mostly exposed by the black thong panties. He scrambled around to the backs of her thighs, getting a giggle from her as he presumably tickled her again. He let a paw fall to her left cheek and she full-on laughed. "Okay, that was weird," she said, glancing back over her shoulder at him. "I've not really been spanked by a human partner, much less a squirrel." He did it again and she laughed, but there was a moan in there too. He filed that bit of information away for later. He let himself play, running back and forth over her body like she were a tree, occasionally pausing to brush her skin with his tail. Then he settled on her back and nuzzled his face against her shoulder blade, finally giving in the impulse to lick the salt from her skin. She gasped and shuddered. He thought he might burst if he didn't change forms again once soon. She squirmed, thighs pressing together, and he closed his eyes and tried once more to force the change. Unlike previous efforts, it worked, and his body sank as the bed sank as his body mass increased exponentially. Ray gasped and scrambled for the sheet, suddenly shy again. "Hi," she breathed, a little smile curving her lips despite her nerves. "Hi. So this is the weirdest and most fun date I've ever been on," he supplied helpfully. "Is that what this is, a date?" He wondered if he'd made a misstep, but considering the day so far, and his growing certainty that she was the only one for him, he shrugged and said, "If you want it to be." "I think I'd like that," she said, "provided you don't have some weird no fucking on the first date rule." He laughed with her. It felt good. It felt right. He reached out, tucked a bit of hair behind her ear, brushed his thumb over her bottom lip, and she opened her mouth, tongue darting out to brush it. "Do you want to talk about anything? Everything?" She shook her head. "We probably should, I know that, but Ben, I've wanted you for so long. I guess I worry that talking might ruin it or wake me from this beautiful but strange dream." "The one where you're in bed with a squirrel?" She snorted. It was adorable. "Can I kiss you, Ray?" "Please," she whispered, already closing the distance between them. It was gentle, even tentative at first, but quickly grew beyond that. He wanted to take his time, really. But when she groaned against his mouth and sucked on his tongue, and then ground her wet pussy against his thigh, the need to claim his mate overtook him. She turned on her side where they were kissing, and he eased her onto her back again. He shoved the bralette up and took a nipple into his mouth. Ray cried out again, clutching his head to her as he sucked almost of her breast into his mouth. Her hips rolled, grinding against him, and it was his turn to groan. He switched the attentions of his mouth to her other breast as his hands plucked at the soaked fabric of her thong. She didn't protest when he ripped it away, just bit out a string of curse words when his fingers brushed over her and then away. "I know, baby," he mumbled against her skin. "Just a little longer, I promise." "No, now," she insisted, thrashing under him. Now, please, Ben!" Of course he obliged, shifting until the head of his cock lined up with her just so. He hooked his arm beneath her left knee, opening her wider as he pushed inside. She hissed and he froze, but she took a breath and begged him not to stop. He peppered her face with kisses and tried to move slowly, not wanting to hurt her. "It's okay, Ben. I'm okay. I want you to move. I need you to move." He nodded, pulled almost all the way out before slamming back inside. She locked her legs around his hips. Her ragged nails dug into his back. The headboard slammed against the wall, and a framed picture fell to the floor. "Close," he muttered, reaching between them to rub her clit with his thumb. "I can, if you want." He tried, but couldn't get the words out. "IUD," she managed. "Come inside me. Need it. Fill me up." She babbled before her breath caught in a wordless cry as her body rhythmically clenched around him. He thrust into her harder, another picture crashing to the floor, the bed frame groaning dangerously as his movements became rough and erratic. He gasped and groaned like a dying man as he came inside her, just as she'd asked, then collapsed on her, barely managing to roll to the side so she could breathe. They spent the rest of the evening in bed. The weekend too, in between bouts of lovemaking, not that he dared call it that out loud, not at least not yet. They talked about nearly everything. Yes, he was the squirrel that had brought her food as a child, and he must have imprinted on her then because he'd barely dated in the passing years. No, he wasn't upset or weirded out that she'd let him touch her in her squirrel form. It'd still been him, after all. Yes, he could mostly control the change outside the full moon. He even told her he'd suspected the reason he'd changed in the break room was because she'd accepted his best nut when he offered, a mating ritual of sorts. He slipped it in casually. Then the comment that squirrels mate for life. She took it better than he had expected, looking him up and down speculatively before asking the question she'd been holding back. "Can you stay mostly you, but just with the tail and maybe ears?" "I can try." "Good." She leaned in and kissed him. "Sounds like we have plenty of time to work on that." It is crack, but it is just lovely. It's so nice. I'm hesitant to say a story that involves a squirrel tail is fluffy, but it is fluffy. It's so cute. I was really looking forward to reading that earlier, and I just last time, and I couldn't at all do it. So I'm very pleased that I managed to get it going this time. So am I holding up okay? Oh, there's a burr right there, isn't there? Excuse me. Oh good, Firebot's working again. That means that my little robot that'll kick you out if you mean to me is working again. Woo! I mean, don't mean to me. I'm very nice. I will cry. Oh. Thank you, Abby. So it's not quite to my preferred standard as a thespian. Also, I need to put some more hibiscus in my flask. Put her in. Alright, so the second story we're going to try for is Drink From Me and Live Forever by I Ship Star Wars. And then I believe we are going to attempt the beginning of your serialization, but do you want to wait until I'm a bit better for that, Abby? Yeah, I swapped it around because the Squirrel Story is a little bit of an easier read. There's a few more growls and quite a lot more I do not, but I also wouldn't mind going short because obviously. Ugh. So yeah, should we see how we Oh, that could be fun. Yeah, that could be good fun. Sorry, I'm just going to put up this here. Right. Let's do this one and then we'll see how I'm doing after that. So, additional so yes, Drink For Me and Live Forever by I Ship Star Wars. It's a Raylo story. Freeform, alternate universe, modern setting. Vampire Raylo, Dark Ray. Dracula influence and references, fluff and smut. Blood drinking, reincarnation, role reversal, glove kink, because it's October, Vampire Ray, Human Men Solo, one shot, happy ending. Let's try this one again. Halloween traditions in America had always amused Ray. Far from the bonfires and community festivals of old, Halloween in the modern age was mostly celebrated in private residences and drinking establishments. Sitting alone in a dimly lit nightclub, she watched as sweaty men danced with half-naked women. Their flimsy costumes and fancy cocktails glittered under the pulsing lights. The hunger stirred within her. A primal desire to hunt the sea of writhing bodies for easy prey. She was not here for them, however. Her keen eyes scanned the room, setting on a bar that was decorated with plastic ghosts and pumpkins. The bartender was a tall man with raven black hair, the only one beside herself not dressed in costume. His brown eyes narrowed, too focused on crafting cocktails to notice her gaze. Ray bit her bottom lip as she watched him. No, she told herself, not him, not yet. She'd been stalking him for a week now, watching him from a distance. This one was special. She would have to wait for the right moment. She had travelled this world for 4 centuries. She knew how to be patient. Still, the hunger would have to be sated, soon, and away from prying eyes. Rising from her seat, she headed for the exit. Ben had let out an exhausted sigh as he clocked out from his shift. Halloween was always a busy time for the club, and tonight had been no exception. He was eager to get away from the drunken crowds and relax at home. A few minutes later, he changed out of his uniform shirt, collected his belongings from a locker. He left through the back door, which opened to a narrow alley behind the club. His apartment was only a few blocks away, so the walk home would be easy. Outside, the sky was clear, with a million stars surrounding a full moon. He could still hear the booming bass emanating from the club, but other than that, the night was quiet. Ben turned up the collar of his jacket to ward off the crisp autumn air. He set off down the alleyway, instinctively holding his breath as he passed a dumpster. Something was moving in the shadows there. He assumed it was a homeless person, or perhaps someone who'd drunk too much at the club. It was only when he heard a strangled cry Ben turned back to look closer. He saw two figures now, one on top of the other. "Hello, is everything all right?" He cautiously stepped toward them, hoping someone would speak up before he jumped to the wrong conclusion. Fumbling at his jacket pocket, he pulled his phone out and turned on the display. The light revealed a man, one of the club's regular customers, lying on his back. His head lolled to one side. He was either unconscious or dead. 2 puncture marks gaped from his throat. A trail of fresh blood, leaves streaming from each one. Something had crouched on top of the man. Something with pale skin and clawed hands. The creature recoiled with a hiss at the interruption, one hand shielding their face from the light. What the hell was that? Ben took a few steps backwards, almost dropping his phone in the process. He was not one to frighten easily, but what stood before him looked like something straight out of his nightmares. The creature lowered its hand and faced him with red eyes that blazed like hellfire. They burned into his own, holding him captive despite his best efforts to look away. He felt a shudder of fear surge through him as he realised he was completely at its mercy. Leave this place. Forget what you saw here. The commands echoed unspoken in Ben's mind, and he felt powerless to resist it. His body shuddered once more, and then everything went black. The next thing he knew, he was standing outside his apartment with no memory of how he got there. His hands trembled as they turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. Once inside, Ben leaned against the door and rubbed at his temples. Why couldn't he remember walking home? Was he so tired from work that his brain had just blanked out? He struggled out of his jacket and hung it on the wall. Whatever the reason for his memory lapse, he was home now, and he felt too anxious to go to bed. Time for some beer and Netflix. Beer in hand, he walked to the couch and saw half of it was already occupied. His dog, a large brown mutt, acknowledged him with perked ears and a tail wag. "Hey, Chewy," he greeted, scratching the dog behind its ears. "Want to watch a movie with me?" Ben was about to sit down when he heard a soft knock at the door. That was odd. It was 1 a.m, and everyone in the building was either asleep or out partying. He approached the door cautiously, wary of who could be on the other side. Peering through the peephole, he saw a woman standing alone in the hallway. She was probably looking for a neighbour's apartment and got lost. He opened the door a few inches, enough to get a good look at the woman. She was young and pale, with hazel eyes and brown hair tied up in a bun. A vintage silver locket hung from a chain around her neck, its cover set with a large ruby in the centre. Her slim frame was covered with a black woolen trench coat that reached her calves, and below that were black stiletto heels. Ben's mouth gaped at the sight of her. She was astoundingly beautiful, and he couldn't help staring. "Good evening, sir." Her words were thick with an accent he couldn't place. Something about her seemed familiar. He was sure that he'd seen her before, but he couldn't remember where. "Hey," he replied. His brain scrambled to form a cohesive sentence before he made a fool of himself. "I'm sorry. Have we met before. In another life, perhaps. Her crimson lips curved into a warm smile. She extended a gloved hand out to him. My name is Ray. I'm Ben, he answered, shaking her hand awkwardly. It is a pleasure to meet you, Ben. The sound of his name on her lips had a strange ring to it. Everything about this woman seemed to be out of place, as if she had arrived on his doorstep from another time. But her beauty and grace were charming. Ben found himself smiling at her. I'm afraid I must ask you for help. May I come in? Ray took a small step forward, and Ben found himself opening the door to permit her entry. Her shoulder brushed his arm as she passed. Ben closed the door, his mind a jumble of questions. Why had he just let this strange woman into his apartment? What did she want with him? And more importantly, why couldn't he stop staring at her? His thoughts were interrupted by a low, rumbling growl. Chewie had left the couch and approached Ray, his lips pulled back in a snarl. What is it, boy? Ben felt confused and a little alarmed. Chewie never acted this way around strangers, not even the mailman. It seemed like even he could sense there was something odd about this woman. Ray was not frightened by the dog's hostility. In fact, she looked delighted to see him. Crouching down, she held out her arms to beckon him forward. She spoke to Chewie in a language Ben didn't recognise, her voice low and soothing. Whatever she said seemed to calm the dog. He sat down in front of her and nuzzled at her hand, his tail wagging once more. She ran her gloved hands through his fur, one reaching behind his ears, the other scaling down his back. Such a loyal beast, she murmured. Your master must be proud. Ben watched her hands stroke Chewie with an odd fascination and felt a twinge of something close to envy. He wondered how it would feel to have those leather gloves glide over his skin. He imagined her nimble fingers combing through his hair, raking across his scalp. Ray regarded him with an amused smirk, as if she could read his mind. Ben shook his head to chase the thoughts away. He barely knew this woman, and he couldn't be jealous of his dog. That was absurd. Clearing his throat, he decided it was time to change the subject. So, you said you needed help with something? She nodded and rose to her feet. The ruby pendant on her chest sparkled as it caught the light. Yes, though perhaps we need help from each other. Her fingers worked at the buttons of her trench coat and pulled it off, revealing a simple black dress underneath. She hung the coat on the wall next to Ben's jacket. I need to tell you a story, she said, turning to face him. Long, long ago and half a world away, there was once a prince named Kylo Ren. He ruled over the lakeside kingdom of Chandria. Kylo Ren married a princess from a neighbouring kingdom, and for a time there was peace. A few years later, an army arrived from a distant land, bent on conquering the kingdom of their emperor. Kylo and his bride fought back with their own armies, and it seemed like they would succeed in forcing the intruders out. Her face hardened, contorted with grief and bitterness. But they were betrayed. One of Kylo's generals made an alliance with the emperor in exchange for wealth and power. They murdered the prince and burnt his castle to the ground. Ray lowered her eyes, wiped a stray tear from her cheek. Ben watched her in silence, unsure of what he should do. Her feelings for the story were so strong, it was as if she'd witnessed it firsthand. What happened to the princess? He asked finally. She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed close to him, lifting her left hand up to caress his cheek. Suddenly, it was harder to think, harder to breathe. Ben felt mesmerised under the weight of her gaze and the pressure of her breasts against his chest, and his thought to dark places. Do you believe in destiny? She asked. That even the powers of time can be altered for a single purpose? I'm sorry, I don't understand. That's all right. You will. I'll show you. With a sly smile, she raised her right hand to her mouth, tugging her glove off with her teeth. Her naked hand reached up to the other side of his face. Don't be afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what? He asked, but it was too late. The room dissolved around them. Darkness swallowed them whole. The first thing Ben saw was a castle. A majestic stone castle next to a sparkling blue lake. It looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. And then he looked closer. He saw two figures standing together on a balcony that looked out over the water. There was a man with long black hair, a prince judging by the fine clothes he wore. Kylo Ren, and the woman at his side was Rey, or someone who looked like Rey. Her skin was tan. Her eyes were bright with joy. She wore a beautiful silver gown decked with jewels that sparkled in the sun. A familiar ruby pendant hung from her neck. Kylo turned towards his bride, his face coming into view. A cold shock went through Ben as he recognised that face. It was his own. No, that was impossible. The scene changed to a battlefield in a countryside. The prince and princess stood back to back, their royal finery replaced by armour. Kylo wielded a sword against 4 enemy soldiers, while Rey held her own with a double-bladed quarterstaff. Soon the lovers were the only ones left standing. They stared at each other, both sweaty, exhausted from combat. Weapons lowered, they lunged for each other, joining in a passionate kiss as the battle raged on in the distance. The vision ended, and reality began to seep back into Ben's awareness. His lips felt warm and moist, almost as if he was kissing Rey. And not just kissing her, his arms had been wrapped around her waist, holding her close. Part of him knew he should stop, but that part was quickly silenced when her tongue darted into his mouth. Rey's hands moved from his face to the back of his head, fingers raking through his hair in the same manner he'd imagined earlier. A shudder of pleasure ran from the base of his skull down his spine. 2 words escaped from his parted lips, a foreign phrase in a voice that was not his own. It felt as if someone else had spoken through him. The woman in his arms hummed with approval. Ben opened his eyes and saw Rey's had turned bright red. Red as hellfire. Oh, hello, Dampiers. You're going to have to listen to the rerun if you want to hear squirrels. I opened with squirrels today. He gasped in horror and stumbled backward. Memories from earlier that night suddenly came back to him. Walking alone down the nightclub alley, something moving in the shadows, a man on the ground covered in blood. And finally, a creature with pale skin and red eyes. "What the hell are you?" he demanded. Her eyes lowered and resumed their hazel colour. "I am the monster that breathing men would kill. I am Nosferatu, a vampire." Ben didn't know how to respond to that. His heart was still pounding from the memory of meeting her in the alley, and his mind was still trying to process everything else. It didn't make sense. Even more frustrating was the fact he already missed the warmth of her body against him. What sort of monster was she? He still felt strangely attracted to her, and judging by the sudden arch of her eyebrows, she knew it too. "What did you do to me? How did you put those visions in my head?" "I only wanted to show you the truth of things. The truth of who you are centuries ago." "So, let me get this straight. You're a vampire, and you think I'm some sort of reincarnation of your dead husband." Rey stiffened at the last 2 words. After Kylo's death, I was consumed by grief and rage. I used forbidden magic to surrender my soul to the darkness. In return, I received the power to wreak vengeance against those who had betrayed us. Her hands went to the locket at her chest, caressing it. I didn't realize the heavy price I would pay for such vengeance. I was cursed to live through the centuries on the blood of mortals. I thought I'd never see my husband again. But then, I found you. Rey moved toward him, her fingers opening the clasp of the locket. Inside were 2 small portraits, one of herself and the other of Kylo Ren. They were worn and faded by time, but Kylo's resemblance to Ben was undeniable. "That's impossible," he whispered. Is it? Her eyes met his, searching for something within them. You said something earlier after you kissed me. It was a phrase in Chandrian. Do you know what it means? Ben nodded. He hadn't been sure at first, but then it came to him as if he'd known all along. It means my beloved. His eyes fell once more to the ruby locket. He reached out to hold it in his hand, thumb circling the ruby stone at its centre, his mind filled with visions again, ancient memories from a place he used to call home. I gave you this, he murmured softly. It was a gift for your birthday. Yes. Ray placed her bare hand over his, pressing it flat against her chest. Her gloved hand traced a line down his jaw and swept over his lower lip. Oh, my love, I have crossed oceans of time to find you. Ben kissed her again, and everything he was so uncertain of seemed to fall into place. His hands roamed over the curves of her body as if he had done it 100 times before. It felt like a hole in his heart had suddenly been filled. And it was Ray who completed him, made him feel whole. They stumbled into Ben's bedroom, still kissing, hands running rampant over each other's bodies. Ray let out a gasp as Ben slammed her into the back of the door. He was strong for a mortal, but she was stronger and knew he couldn't hurt her. She nearly tore his shirt in her efforts to get it off of him. Her hands ran down his muscled chest and abdomen, settling on the belt that fastened his pants. Ben busied himself finding the zipper at the side of her dress, getting it open with one swift tug. The dress fell to the floor at the same time his pants did. Only then did his lips leave hers, kissing his way down her neck and chest as his fingers undid the clasp of her bra. Once that was removed, he covered her breasts with his kisses. Ray's breath came out as a hiss as Ben teased her nipple with his tongue, then his teeth. Fingers grasped at each other's hips, and soon their underwear joined the pile of clothes on the floor. Ben, she panted, get on the bed. He didn't move, so she raked her fingers through his hair and pulled hard enough to get his attention. Get on the bed or I'll carry you there myself. Ben grinned up at her, giving her one last lick before straightening himself. She felt the hunger stirring again as she watched Ben lay down on the bed. The monster within her wanted his blood, but the woman in her wanted something else entirely. Night after night she feasted on blood, but this was something she hadn't done in 400 years. Ray crawled on top of him, knees straddling his hips. Reaching down with one hand, her fingers grasped his manhood and guided him inside her wet entrance. Then she slowly pushed inward, her body trembling as she took in every inch of him. Ben's mouth gasped open, a low moan escaping his lips. Smiling at his response, she began to rock her hips back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm. One of his hands moved between her thighs, thumb circling the cluster of nerves that nestled there. Ray cried out and quickened her pace in response. Every muscle in her body tensed as the pleasure put within her, higher and higher until she could barely contain it. Ray. Ben's hands clenched at her hips. He thrust deep inside her with enough force to make them climax together. Ben, my love. She dipped forward to kiss him, her body shuddering with release. They lay together for a while, arms wrapped around each other. Ray was about to doze off when Ben finally broke the silence. What happens when you bite people? Do they turn into vampires? She raised her head to look at him. No. It is the same as any flesh wound. If you lose some blood, you pass out. You lose a lot of blood, you die. So you've never made another vampire. Her brows furrowed with concern. Why are you asking me this? Ben propped himself up on his elbows. His eyes narrowed at her. You know why. I want to join you. Ray shook her head sadly. You do not know what you ask. This is not a gift, it is a curse. She sat up on bed, his back turned to him. The monster inside of her was stirring, spurred by her lover's words. Bite him, it whispered to her. Taste this blood. Make him yours. It's only a curse if you have to go through it alone. Ben moved to sit beside her, draping one arm over her shoulder. You're not alone. Not anymore. Let me join you. I can't, Ben. I love you too much to condemn you. She tore her gaze away from him, afraid to even look at him lest she lose control of herself. There was a silence between them for a moment, and Ray felt his fingers brush her cheek. Valerie. She turned to face him, eyes wide in wonder. Her full name, she hadn't heard it in centuries. Valerie. He said it once more, his eyes soft and pleading. Please, I don't want to lose you again. Ben pulled her close, and Ray found herself nuzzling against his neck, her eyes focused on the vein pulsing just below his skin. Taste this blood, make him yours. Her fangs extended automatically, and she let the monster in her take over. Ben's body stiffened as the fangs pierced his flesh. She clung to him as she drank, savouring the taste of his blood on her tongue, but all too soon she heard his heartbeat slowing. She forced herself to pull away. Ray. His weak voice faltered as he collapsed in her arms. He was drained nearly to the point of death. Listen to me, my beloved. You must drink now. Drink from me and live forever. She lowered his body to the bed and lay down next to him. One of her claw-like fingernails sliced a line above her breast. Ben watched the cut drip with blood, his eyes already hungry. With her help, he pressed his mouth against her chest and drank. Ray hummed with pleasure, feeling him draw out her very essence. She gave him as much as she could before she weakened, then pushed him away. He cried out as his body writhed in pain, struggling against the throes of death, and everything went still. Ben. She reached out to him, afraid for a moment she'd actually killed him, but then his eyes opened and they flashed bright red. He gave her a wolfish grin and then pulled her in for a kiss. Yes, beloved, I'm here, and I'm yours forever. Oh, that's a bit good though. There is a sequel to that one, but that's too much growling. So yeah, do go, if you go in, when you go in, please remember to kudos and comment on the author's fix that you have enjoyed. When you go in, if you thought there is a sequel, it's a very good sequel as well. But I am not up for any more graveling. But you can see why I opened with the squirrels, because it's a little bit easier on the throat than that one. And my ambiguous, what does a Chandrian accent sound like? I went back to some old vampire movies and went faintly Slovenian. We had a lot of fun Dampiers with the squirrel one. I think poor Snowy might have been mildly horrified, but thank you, Avi. I put quite a lot of thought into it. So I think we're going to carry on with the transformation. Fuck it, we're just going to have Transformation January. So lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! I am thoroughly tempted to do your were goldfish one, but it doesn't. The story doesn't go as far as an actual transformation. So, what do you reckon? Should we have transformationary? I am calling it early tonight because I am still recovering, and as you can, I'm struggling now. Oh, it doesn't sound good, I know. And Avi reminded me that I need to think about my brand and not just sort of push through and put out crap content. So I'd rather put out 2 okay stories than push for a third that was going to be... I'm trying really hard not to cough now. Changing colours. So yeah, we're only gonna go for the hour tonight. We've had a couple of lovely stories. This will go up relatively quickly onto YouTube, so Dampier can go back and listen to the especially where I don't appear to have the ability to edit. Well, so I've mentioned BGG a few times. Big Grumpy Gamer, who, if you want to listen to a mellifluous English accent, talking softly and whispering in your ear for a couple of hours, go and look at his content. He mostly plays Satisfactory, which is the most chilled out game in the history of the universe. So you can just listen to him whisper quietly in your ear. You don't have to chat too much in the chat if you don't want to, but feel free to let him know that you're there and just say, I'm not really here, I'm lurking. But yes, you can tell him MK sent you, because he knows what my audience is there for if they go and listen to him and it's not Satisfactory. All right, give me a second. Is
front page.
BGG.
Everybody who's new to the stream, welcome guys. Playing Halo Infinite.
Sorry
replay.
for the weird noises. Okay.
You fully loaded, Grumpy?
I have reloaded myself, yes.
Accidentally quite loud for a second there. So, but yeah, he is going to come and give me a hand with OBS, and he thinks he can show me how to do some edits and stuff. So, yeah, go and listen to Big Grumpy Gamer talking really. It's a nice voice, isn't it? He's got a lovely voice. But yeah, he's gonna hopefully help me with OBS and stuff. We might also be streaming Warcraft, so you can listen to a lot of English people just sort of chattering away as we beat things up. That should be fun. But don't worry, that won't be on a regular streaming night. I won't take away from my stories. Oh, ow. You see how swollen my throat is? Right. Much love to you all. Thank you very much for sharing your stories. Don't forget to go into the stories that have been shared and comment, kudos, big up our writers and authors. And yeah, I shall see if I can write some kind of promo for Transformanuary, and that way we want more werewolves and monsters. Bring on the teeth and claws. Alright, thank you very much for your understanding, my loves. Where Annuary? Could be. I didn't want to leave out the vampires though. I'll play with it. Good night, everybody.